Today we are going to redesign Andrei Jikh's YouTube thumbnail. So Andrei Jikh is a personal finance YouTuber and we're going to redesign his thumbnail today. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to use his previous thumbnail and we're going to clear everything so that we're left with only his face. Then we're going to start recreating the thumbnail by maybe working on the saturation and the exposure. So you just work and reduce and increase up to the level whereby it comes to what you actually want to. Then we're going to work on the brightness and contrast so that we have that pop-up feeling and it represents a thumbnail that is able to be clicked by majority of the people. So you just want to play around with these settings a little bit until it comes to what you actually really want. Then we're going to work on the hue saturation, whereby we want to maybe readjust the look of the thumbnail here, that is the face of the subject, who is Andrei Jikh. So you want it to appear as that cartoon like look which you normally see in the majority of Mr. Beast's thumbnail. So you just work on that until it comes to a level that you actually want. Then you're going to work on the hue chroma. Now this gives the thumbnail a little bit of color, and but you want still to maintain the same color as what you'd actually look like in a human setting, but you want to add it some color so that it actually pops in the YouTube. Once it's recommended to YouTube, you want it to start popping a little bit more. Then the next thing we're going to work on is on the saturation. So this is trying to readjust the settings so that it appears as what you'd actually want. Then once that is done, you are going to save. So if you look at the previous thumbnail Andrei Jikh used and what we have actually created, you can see there is some difference. So you look at what we've created, it's popping, but what he had initially looks a little bit dull. So that's the essence of having a good thumbnail editor. So the next thing, we're going to add a layer so that we can readjust and add other items. So in the previous thumbnail we had just a white or grayish background. So we're going to add this black interior background that we normally find on Google. So we just search for a black interior background. Then you want to use the Gaussian blur to blur it a little bit so that the subject pops up at the front of the background there. So as you can see, you're still readjusting the Gaussian blur a little bit, so you don't want the background to be more superior than the subject you have at the forefront here. So you just work with the blur so that at the background we still can see some features, but it does not limit what we are seeing on the subject. So as you can see here, we've readjusted the Gaussian blur and you can see that the image of the subject, that is Andrei Jikh, is popping up a little bit compared to the background. Then we're going to add another layer as well. Then we're going to use the previous thumbnail he had some money appearing in the thumbnail, so you want to delete everything you do not need so that we can use this as a foreground as well, which will appear as money. So you want it to stand out in the finance niche because he's a finance guy, so you want the money to stand out. It's going to also increase the click-through rate. So we're going to flip this as well so that it appears on the right of your thumbnail. Then that's how it basically looks like. Then we can now re-add it again so that we have what he had initially, but now with a background that looks really cool. So you can turn off what you want the layer so that you can work on an individual layer. So try turning off layers as you work so that you can specifically concentrate on one specific layer that you are currently working on. So as you can see again on the background itself, so we want to readjust the exposure a little bit, because as you can see, when we are having all the layers at once, the exposure at the background was a little bit more, so it was maybe hindering what we are seeing in the thumbnail. You want to add the text or the wordings that is going to resonate with what you have on the title. So adding the worst crash, that's what we want to add here. So this is going to resonate with what Andrei Jikh has placed on the title so that they both go at the same pace, so that if somebody looks at the thumbnail itself at first, then they're going to look at the title and they are going to have that resonating feel inside, that is, it increases the click-through rate. So you want to go with the white text, because remember we have a black interior background, so we want to go with the white text so that it's going to pop as well. So we don't want anything in the background limiting what we have in the foreground, so we're going to go with the white text here, which really stands out, as you can see on the thumbnail here that is coming up. So that's basically it. The next thing we need to do, we need to add the money, so that we are going to add just one note at the top here, because we are now included the worst crash title, so we cannot have both notes appearing on the thumbnail because it's going to block the view. So we're just going to work with one note. So we can use what we have here and just erase the bottom one, or we can just go to remove BG and recreate it afresh so that we only have one note. Then we can later flip it and assign it as it is. So as you can see, we just erase what we do not want, then we come in and add this to GIMP. So remember, the software we are using here is GIMP, so it's actually a competitor to Photoshop, does everything that Photoshop can do. So Photoshop is more popular, but GIMP also works really well. So as you can see, we've added the note there and it's really looking okay. The next thing, we're going to add a new layer. Now we want to add particles to the thumbnail itself. So particles are added to a thumbnail and they enable the thumbnail look a little bit sharp and a little bit clean. We are going to reduce how the particles appear by using the chroma tool here, so it's going to give you the color that you actually want. So this, you can work with the creator you want. So Andrei Jikh has this basic color of green, so we're going to use that green in the particles as well. So just play around with the hue chroma until it appears to the green that we actually want. So as you can see, it's now coming up to the green we actually want, so that's what we're going to work with. Then you can also adjust the lightness of the chroma here so that it's not really popping as much. You want it to appear subtle in the background there, just behind the creator here that we are working with. Then the next thing, we're going to add another layer. So the reason we're adding another layer is we want to add a glow factor on the background there. So we want to add a glow factor behind Andrei Jikh, who is the subject here, then as well as in front of the background there. So the reason as to why we are adding this glow feature, we want to separate the subject at the forefront and the background there. So as you can see, if we turn off all the other layers, you can see that the green is actually popping up a little bit. Now remember, we had blurred the background, so we want to maybe reduce the blur a little bit so that people can be able to see the features that are at the background. So once we do that, you can see now the image is coming up really well, and now we have a good thumbnail, as you can see. So we also want to blur the particles we added. We want them to blur so that we can have these little items at the bottom here. Seems like some lighting coming up at the bottom.